The anger and violence that erupted 1 year ago today had been brewing for decades in the U.S., long before the Trump administration. A new 6-part documentary series streaming on Paramount Plus takes an in-depth look at the rise of domestic terrorism and extremism. A former leader of a far-right militant group spoke about the lead-up to the Capitol assault. Here's a preview from the series.
Most of those people had no idea what they were doing or where it was leading them. A very, very small percentage are the ones who are willing to cross the line. That's the ones that the leaders, or what I call the manipulators, that's the ones that they're looking for, is who's willing to cross the line.
Molly Amman joins me now. She's a former FBI profiler and is featured in this documentary series. Molly, thanks so much for being with us. The series documents decades of hate, from white supremacy to the Oklahoma City bombing. You've been tracking domestic extremism for years. How did we get to January 6th?
That's a big question. Extremism has always been with us, almost since the dawn of civilization. You can trace the earliest instance of a mass violent extremist movement to the 2nd century BC. So I think it needs to be said that it's diverse and it's ubiquitous. In the United States, it has waxed and waned over the years. There have been spikes in left-wing extremism, spikes in the right. But what we are seeing now, what happened on January 6th at the Capitol, was really a new violent mass movement. It is extreme right-wing, but it is not exactly the same as the rise in right-wing extremism that we've been seeing over the past few years. And that's largely because of the big lie, of course, highly motivational factor. But there are what I would sort of think of as parallel tracks of extremism now unfolding in the United States as we speak.
Molly, some Republicans have falsely asserted Antifa was behind the Capitol assault. We know it was pro-Trump supporters. We know far-left extremism and violence does exist. How would you assess the threat level of domestic extremism right now compared to previous moments in U.S. history?
Well, right now, the action is clearly with the extreme right. If you'd talked to me in the 1960s, I would have said the left-wing extremist movement is where the action was. But that has fundamentally changed. There was a little bit of a spike in some left-wing extremism, some single-issue terrorism earlier in this century. But generally speaking, right-wing extremism has been on the rise. Certainly since the 2016 or so timeframe, it's been distinctly on the rise. In my opinion, without question, that's where we need to be focusing our attention.
A year later, former President Trump is still falsely alleging there was widespread voter fraud in 2020. President Biden commented on his predecessor earlier. Let's listen in for a second.
Here's the truth. The former President of the United States of America has created and spread a web of lies about the 2020 election. He's done so because he values power over principle, because he sees his own interest as more important than his country's interest, than America's interest.
Not only is Mr. Trump still peddling these lies, but some prominent members of the Republican Party are doing it as well. Is the undermining of trust in the electoral process a national security threat?
Well, I think it is. It's an incredible vulnerability. The security of our nation is inextricably intertwined with our democracy. Everything functions based on the well-functioning democracy and American institutions based on that. And when people no longer believe that they are functioning as they're intended to, where do we go from there? It's a great vulnerability. And we know that those messages are persuasive. The University of Chicago Center for Security and Threats is doing some great research on the drivers of the January 6th insurrection. And what their excellent survey data has found is that people are believing that the election was stolen, the 2020 election was stolen, and that the Biden presidency is illegitimate. Somewhere on the order of perhaps 24% of American adults potentially believe that. So it's a big deal.
Foreign adversaries are also sowing distrust through social media and tried to meddle in the 2020 election. Does it appear their tactics are making a significant impact on Americans and democracy?
Well, they're certainly trying. I don't know that I'm well positioned with all the data to quantify, the impact, but they're in there, they're in the mix. we're so vulnerable because of the open nature of our society, right? We have that Bill of Rights. People have access to just about anything they want, particularly on social media, and it's so vulnerable for exploitation by malign actors. Moscow, Beijing, even Saudi Arabia and Iran, we know with particularity, were in there spreading narratives of the QAnon conspiracy theory, which of course was one of the beliefs held by January 6th insurrectionists. So they're in there, and I think it would be a mistake to underestimate that influence and our vulnerability to it. We have to be on our guard.
Molly Amman, thank you.